My name is Tenzin, and for 50 years, the world knew me as the Sherpa who had summited Everest more times than any man alive. They celebrated my endurance, my knowledge of the ice. They don't know the real reason I kept going back up. They don't know the secret I carried down with me every single time, heavier than any pack. I need to tell you this now, because their machines are getting closer. They're quiet. Buzzing drones are mapping shadows that should remain unseen. And silence is no longer enough to protect him. This is my confession. For most of my adult life, I hid one of the Métis, the creature your world calls a Yeti. I sheltered him, and in return, he kept me alive. Now, the government is about to find the last of his kind, and I am too old to stop them with force, but I can stop them with the truth. My truth. This is the story of why. To understand any of this, you must first understand the mountain, not the postcards, not the triumphant photos from the summit. You have to feel the physical weight of it. You have to feel the air, so thin at 8,000 meters that it feels like you're breathing through a wet cloth. Every breath is a conscious effort, a small victory against the void. You have to understand the silence. It is not an absence of sound. It is a presence, a low, deep hum that vibrates in your bones, a constant reminder of the immense pressure of the rock and ice around you. A silence so profound that the sudden whip of prayer flags in the wind or the sharp, distant crack of a shifting glacier sounds like a gunshot in a library. This is Sagarmatha, my home, my accomplice. My story began not with a summit, but with a wound that never healed. My father was a guide, like me. He was lost to the Khumbu icefall when I was just a boy. One moment he was a warm, strong presence. The next, he was a story. A ghost claimed by the shifting jaws of the glacier. The mountain gives, and the mountain takes. That phrase is a comfort to some. To me, it was a challenge. I didn't become a guide for the glory or the money. I became a guide to get close to his memory, to stand in the places he stood, and to try and understand the immense, indifferent power that had claimed him. I wanted to learn its language, its rhythms, its secrets. I thought if I could understand the mountain, I could understand my loss. I was wrong. I was looking for an answer, and instead, I found a responsibility. My credibility isn't in a book or a documentary. It is etched into the deep lines on my face, carved by decades of sun and wind. It is in the permanent calluses on my hands from 1,000 ropes, frozen and thawed and frozen again. It is in the precise, instinctive knowledge of every serac and every hidden crevasse on the South Col route. A map written not on paper, but in my muscle memory. I know the sound of safe ice versus the whisper of ice that is about to give way. I know the smell of an approaching storm hours before it appears. These are not skills you learn. They are truths you earn by surviving, season after season, while others do not. This is the knowledge that the world paid me for, and it is this same knowledge that allowed me to keep the greatest secret of all. It happened one season, late in my career. The weather had turned without warning, a brutal, swirling blizzard that erased the world into a disorienting vortex of white. Visibility was zero. A client, a rich foreign climber full of the kind of arrogance that only new, expensive gear can provide, had pushed ahead against my warnings. He was now missing. The search was hopeless. The mountain was in the process of burying everything. We were defeated, the wind clawing at us, screaming in our ears. The cold was a physical thing, a predator seeking entry into our bones. The team leader, a good man, made the only call he could. The search was over. The man was gone. We were ordered back to Camp 4. Survival was now the only priority, and as the wind howled, a different sound cut through the chaos. It was not a rockfall. It was not the wind shrieking over a ridge. It was a high-pitched, guttural cry, a cry of pure pain. It was a living sound, but it was a sound that did not belong. It was too deep to be a bird, too high to be a bear. It was an anomaly, an error in the symphony of the storm. A sound of an animal, yes, but one that I, who knew every creature on these slopes, had never, ever heard before. It was a sound of something that was not supposed to exist, and it was in terrible, terrible trouble. The team leader screamed over the wind, "Tenzin, move, now!" He was right. Every instinct, every rule of survival I had ever learned, demanded I turn my back and descend. To seek out a strange sound in a whiteout blizzard on the face of Everest is not bravery, it is a form of suicide. You do not leave the group. You do not leave the rope. You do not follow ghosts. These are the first and last commandments of the high altitudes. But something in that cry felt like a debt. It was a sound of such profound suffering. It seemed to create its own gravity, pulling me toward it. It felt connected, somehow, to the loss of my father, another life about to be claimed. I hesitated for only a second. It was the longest second of my life. On one side was safety, logic, my team, and the promise of another sunrise. On the other was a single, impossible sound in the heart of a killer storm. It was a choice between the known world and a world that wasn't supposed to exist. I looked back at the faint shapes of my team, already being swallowed by the snow. Then I looked toward the source of the cry, a direction that led to nothing but treacherous, unmapped icefalls. The mountain gives, and the mountain takes. And sometimes, it asks you to make a choice. I turned away from the party. I untied the safety knot that connected me to the main rope, the umbilical cord that kept us all tethered to the world of the living. The act felt shockingly final. I gave the leader a quick wave, a gesture he would interpret as me just securing my pack, and then I stepped away from the trail. I was alone, a single, dark figure deliberately walking into a wall of white. I was walking toward a sound, with no map, no plan, and a growing certainty that I was breaking a rule far older than any mountaineering code. I was trespassing. The mountain keeps its own counsel, and I was about to hear what it had to say. My own breathing was a roar in my ears, the only thing louder than the wind. Each step was a guess. The snow was up to my thighs, and the world was just a churning chaos of ice and air. I didn't know if I was walking for 5 minutes or an hour. Time dissolves up there. I just followed the memory of that sound, replaying it in my mind, using it as a compass. I was driven by a question that was louder than the storm itself. Who, or what, on this empty, frozen goddess of a mountain, could possibly make a sound like that? What could be in that much pain, and still be alive up here, in this place of endings? I am telling you this part with such detail, because you need to understand. My choice to turn away from my team was the first secret, the first lie. I chose the unknown over the known. I chose a cry of pain over the rules of men. And everything that came after, every year of my life, was built on the foundation of that single, disobedient step into the storm. It was a choice to keep something quiet, to investigate on my own terms, and that choice is what started everything. If you believe a story like this deserves to be heard, that a man's final truth is worth something, please leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. And please, share this. I need you to stay with me until the end. You need to hear what I found. I pushed forward, one frozen foot in front of the other. The sound was gone now, stolen by the wind, but it was burned into my memory. It served as my only landmark in a world that had none. All I could see was a churning whiteness, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. My ice axe was my only anchor to the physical world, its tip probing the snow ahead for crevasses that I could not see. I was no longer a guide. I was a pilgrim, following a sound of suffering. My lungs burned, not just from the altitude, but from a cold fear that was settling deep in my gut. I was deliberately walking away from every known thing, towards something that shouldn't exist. The arrogance of it, the foolishness, it weighed on me. But the memory of that cry was heavier. It was a hook in my soul, pulling me deeper into the storm's heart. I knew that if I turned back now, I would hear that sound in my sleep for the rest of my life. It was a sound that demanded a witness, and I was the only one who had answered its call. Finally, through the swirling snow, I saw a shape, a dark stain against the blinding white. It was huddled and low to the ground. My first thought was relief mixed with dread. The climber. But as I got closer, the shape resolved itself, and the logic of the world seemed to break apart. It wasn't a man in a brightly colored jacket. It was something covered in thick, matted, bone-white fur, the color of old ice. It was small, no bigger than a human child, and it was shuddering, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror. It wasn't the monster of legends, the roaring beast that stalked the high passes. It was a young thing, caught and afraid, its breath coming in panicked, steaming clouds. It looked at me with two dark, intelligent eyes, so full of fear and pain that it stopped me in my tracks. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever seen on this mountain. a place that is defined by its brutal, unforgiving strength. I had found the source of the cry, and it made no sense at all. As I slowly edged closer, I saw the cause of its distress. Its leg, thick and muscular even on its small frame, was horribly twisted. It was caught fast in a rusted steel cable, the frayed end wrapped tight around its ankle. I recognized it immediately. It was a piece of garbage, a forgotten anchor line from an expedition decades ago, left by men who had come, conquered, and abandoned their mess. The steel had cut deep into the flesh, and the snow around it was stained with a dark, almost black blood. The creature whimpered, a low, pathetic sound, and pulled uselessly against the cable, only making the wound worse. It was a cruel, stupid trap. A ghost of human carelessness reaching out from the past to inflict this agony. To see this life, this impossible thing, being tortured by a piece of our world's refuse, it filled me with a sudden, hot shame. The mountain takes, yes, but this was not the mountain. This was us. This was our fault. The pain in its eyes was a direct accusation. A flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision made me freeze. I raised my head slowly, peering past the trapped youth into the deep shadows of a glacial wall 50 meters away. For a moment, I saw nothing but ice and rock. Then, the shadow detached itself from the other shadows. It was immense, a towering figure, at least 3 meters tall, standing perfectly still. Its fur was the same stark white, but thicker, longer, and it blended so perfectly with the snow-dusted rock that it was nearly invisible. It was watching me. I couldn't see its face clearly, just the outline of a massive, powerful form. But I could feel its gaze. It was not a look. It was a physical pressure, a silent, crushing weight on my chest. There was no sound, no threat display, just an absolute, predatory stillness. This was the mother, and I was standing between her and her trapped, bleeding child. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that any sudden movement would be seen as an act of aggression. I was in her world, by her rules. The world shrank to the space between us. The howling wind, the freezing cold, it all faded away. There was only the terrified child, the silent, watching mother, and me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the mountain's deep hum. I could retreat. I could back away slowly, leave them to their fate, and pretend I had seen nothing. It would be the sane thing to do. The climber was gone, and this was not my fight. But I looked from the mother's tense silhouette back to the whimpering child, and I saw the echo of my own story. I saw a life about to be lost to the mountain's indifference, aided by human negligence. The debt I felt earlier, it crystallized. It wasn't a debt to a ghost. It was a debt to the mountain itself, to correct this small, terrible wrong. I unclipped my pack and let it fall softly into the snow. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion that felt like it took a lifetime, I reached for the handle of the ice tool on my belt. It was not a weapon, it was a tool, and I prayed she knew the difference. I took a single, slow step forward. The mother did not move, but I felt the pressure of her gaze intensify, focusing like a beam of light. I knelt in the snow beside the small creature, my own breath held tight in my chest. It flinched away from me, trying to pull its leg back, and let out another high, pained cry. "Shh," I whispered, the sound immediately stolen by the wind, the gesture more for myself than for it. I ignored the child's panic and focused on the cable. It was old and frayed. I positioned the sharp adze of my ice tool against the rusted steel strands, my gloved hands clumsy in the intense cold. I brought my other hand up and struck the back of the tool with the heel of my palm. A dull thud. A few strands snapped. The creature shrieked. I struck again, harder. Another thud. More strands gave way. The mother remained a statue of potential violence. One more strike, with all my strength. There was a sharp, metallic snap that cut through the wind, and the tension in the cable was gone. The cub scrambled backward, dragging its injured leg, and huddled against a rock, its dark eyes still fixed on me. It was free. I did not stand up immediately. I remained on one knee, my head bowed, showing my neck. A gesture of submission. I slowly, carefully, put my ice tool back on my belt. Then, I reached into the pocket of my parka and pulled out a piece of dried yak meat, something I had been saving. My own rations. I placed it gently on a flat, dark rock between us, a stark offering against the snow. I didn't look at the mother. I looked at the ground, then began to back away, one slow step at a time, never turning my back completely. I did not run. I retreated with the deliberate pace of someone who respected the space they were in. When I was 100 meters away, I risked a glance back. The cub was gone. The mother was gone. The piece of meat was gone. The only things left were my footprints and the silence, which felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was watchful. The journey back to camp was a blur. The storm began to break, as if the mountain had held its breath and was now finally exhaling. When I stumbled back to the tents, my team was preparing to descend, assuming I had been lost. I told them I had gotten disoriented, that I had chased a sound I thought was the climber, but found nothing. It was a thin lie, but in the exhaustion and relief of survival, they did not question it. The official story became that Tenzin, the great guide, had almost been claimed by the same storm that took the foolish client. For the next week, as we descended and the expedition wound down, I felt the secret growing inside me. It was a living thing, a warm stone in my gut. I had broken the most fundamental rule of my profession and my people. I had interfered. I had touched something that was not meant to be touched. And now, I carried the knowledge of it alone, a silent pact made in the heart of a blizzard. I had not found an answer to my father's death. I had found a new, and far heavier, question. Back in my small cabin, perched on the edge of the valley, the world felt normal again. The sounds of the village, the smell of juniper incense, the rhythm of daily life. For a week, nothing happened. The silence from the high peaks was just silence again. I began to wonder if I had imagined it, if the altitude and the storm had created a vivid hallucination. I started to doubt myself, to believe the lie I told my team. Maybe I was just an old man whose mind was playing tricks. Then, one morning, I opened my door to the sharp, clean air, and I saw it. Placed squarely on my stone doorstep was a single, perfectly smooth, black river stone. It was heavy in my hand, its surface polished by 1,000 years of water. I knew every rock, every type of geology in this region. This kind of stone did not exist at this altitude. It came from the deep riverbeds, thousands of meters below. To bring it here would have been a deliberate, difficult journey. It was not a rock. It was a message. It was a receipt. The debt had been acknowledged. That stone changed everything. It was proof. It was the start of a conversation. I knew I had to respond, to continue what I had started, but it had to be done in secret, away from the trekking routes, away from the villages, away from any prying eyes. I thought for days, walking the lower ridges near my home. I finally chose a place, a small ice cave, hidden behind a frozen waterfall, its entrance obscured by a permanent curtain of icicles. It was a place off any map, known only to me from my boyhood explorations. It felt sacred, untouched. The following week, under the cover of a moonless night, I made my first true offering. I carried a small bag of Sherpa, roasted barley flour, our staple food, and a brick of Tibetan salt. I left them just inside the cave's mouth, in a dry alcove. I didn't linger. I didn't try to see what was deeper inside. I just left the gifts and walked away, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and reverence. I was formalizing the pact, turning a single act into a ritual. A week passed, then another. I resisted the urge to go back to the cave. The pact required patience, I felt. It was not a transaction, it was a relationship based on trust. Then, during my next expedition, as we were making an ascent on a treacherous glacial field, I saw it. Directly on our path, etched into the surface of the snow, were 3 deep, parallel lines, crossed by a 4th. It was not a natural formation. The lines were deliberate, precise. My younger Sherpas dismissed it as windscour, but I knew it was a sign. It looked like a drawing of a broken bridge. We were approaching a notorious section of the route, a series of snow bridges over a deep, hidden crevasse field. Instead of taking the direct path, I stopped the team. I told them my gut felt wrong, that the snow sounded hollow. I rerouted us, taking a longer, safer path around the area. My client complained about the delay, but my team trusted my instincts. We had established a new language, written in the snow, a language of survival. The exchanges became a quiet rhythm in my life. Every few weeks, I would leave my offerings in the ice cave. The sampa and salt were always taken, and in return, I would find things. The warnings were the most common. A strangely placed rock on a trail would tell me to watch for falling ice. An unusual bird call, imitated perfectly, would alert me to the presence of a snow leopard nearby. But sometimes, the gifts were more. One season, my entire group of clients was suffering from kumbu cough, the hacking, lung-searing affliction of high altitude. The medicines we had were barely helping. I was worried. After a supply run to my cabin, I returned to my tent at base camp to find a small bundle of dried leaves and roots on my sleeping bag. I recognized them instantly. It was a rare blend of Himalayan herbs, a traditional remedy my grandmother used to make. But the plants grew only in a single, inaccessible valley. I made a tea from them, and within a day, my client's coughing eased. He wasn't just warning me, he was caring for me and for mine. The most profound test of our silent contract came during a summit push on Amadablam. The weather was perfect. The team was strong. We were scheduled to leave for the final ascent at 1 a.m. That afternoon, as I did my final check of the route from camp, I saw them. On a flat expanse of snow, clearly visible from my position, were 3 large, dark rocks. They had not been there an hour before. They were arranged in a simple, stark line. 3 rocks. The third client from the left had been the weakest. No, it was simpler. 3 hours? 3 days? No, it was a sign to stop. The meaning was absolute. Do not proceed. I went back to the tent and announced the summit push was delayed by 1 day. My clients were furious. The lead climber accused me of losing my nerve. He threatened to ruin my reputation. I held firm, offering no explanation other than a bad feeling. The next morning, we were woken by a sound like thunder. A serac the size of a monastery had broken off the summit ridge and obliterated the exact path we would have been on. Silence fell over the camp. No one questioned me again. Through these exchanges, I began to understand the rules of our pact. They were never spoken, but they were absolute. If I arrived at the ice cave and found a single black crow feather placed at the entrance, it meant I was not to enter. It meant they were near, or that the space was sacred for a time. I was to turn around and leave, no questions asked. The gifts I left were always simple things: food, salt, sometimes a piece of brightly colored cloth. I never left tools or anything metal, and the most important rule of all was that I was never, ever to try and follow them. I was never to seek them out in the high, hidden valleys above the icefall. Our meeting point was the cave, the boundary between our worlds. To cross it would be a betrayal. Breaking these rules, I knew instinctively, would mean the end of everything. The gifts would stop, the warnings would cease, the watchful presence would recede, and the silence would become empty again. This was a secret I kept even from my wife, Pema. It was a separate life, a quiet ministry I attended to in the heart of the mountain. Over the decades that followed, our bond settled into a quiet, enduring rhythm, a language of signs that grew deeper and more complex than simple warnings. I saw him grow, not just in size, but in presence. From a distance, through my binoculars, I would catch glimpses of him, no longer the terrified cub, but a massive, silent guardian of the high passes, his white fur making him a ghost against the snow. He moved with a grace that defied his bulk, a fluidity that spoke of absolute belonging. The marks he left for me were no longer just about survival on the mountain. They became more personal. A particular arrangement of stones might warn me of a shift in the political winds in Kathmandu that would affect my expeditions, something he could only know by observing the talk of other travelers. He was not just an animal, he was an intelligence, observing my world from the silent vantage of his. The true shift in our dynamic came on a bitter afternoon in my 60th year. I was alone, checking a lower trail for the coming season, when my footing gave way on a patch of loose scree. My leg twisted under me, and I felt a sharp, sickening snap in my ankle. The pain was immediate, white-hot. I was miles from the village, with no one expecting me back until after dark. The sun was already beginning to dip behind the western peaks, and the temperature was plummeting. I tried to stand, but the pain was blinding. I was an old man with a broken ankle, alone on the mountain. For the first time since I was a boy, I felt a raw, primal fear. The cold was a patient hunter, and I knew it would not take long for it to find me. The mountain I knew so well had finally turned on me. As my body began to shake with the encroaching cold, I heard it. A low, guttural call, echoing from the ridge above me. It was not a cry of pain this time, but a question, a sound of location. Hope, sharp and desperate, cut through my fear. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted back, my voice thin and reedy in the vast emptiness. A few minutes later, I heard the sound again, closer this time. Then, a strange noise, the grating sound of a rock being pushed. I dragged myself forward and saw that a small boulder blocking my easiest path had been moved aside. I followed the new path, and a few hundred meters on, a freshly broken branch pointed toward a gentle slope I hadn't seen. He was guiding me. I never saw him, but I felt his presence all around me. A silent shepherd clearing a path for my broken form, turning the tables on our long relationship. The deepest gesture, the one that cemented him in my heart, not as a creature but as kin, came during the long winter Pima fell ill. My wife, my anchor to the world of men, was fading. The doctors in the village had no answers, and my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. My trips to the ice cave became hurried, my offerings left with a distracted mind. The ritual, once a source of quiet purpose, was now just a motion I went through. My thoughts consumed by the sound of Pima's shallow breathing in the other room. The mountain, the secret. It all felt distant and unimportant compared to the slow, quiet avalanche of my impending grief. I was losing the center of my world, and there was no sign he could leave, no warning he could give, that could stop this. I felt utterly, terribly alone in my sorrow, a feeling I hadn't had since my father was taken. A few days after a particularly difficult night, I woke to find it on my doorstep. Lying on the cold stone was a single Himalayan blue poppy. Its petals were a shade of blue so deep and vibrant it seemed to hold the sky itself. This was not just a rare flower, it was an impossible one. It grew only in a few remote, sheer cliffs, places I hadn't had the strength to climb in years. Pima had loved them. We had seen them together on a trek just after we were married, and she often spoke of their fleeting, perfect beauty. To find one here, now, was not a coincidence. It was a gesture of profound empathy. He had seen my grief, my distraction. He had undertaken a difficult, dangerous journey to bring me this single, perfect thing, a symbol of a memory, a shared piece of my life with her. It was his way of sitting with me in my sorrow. He understood, but while our bond deepened, the world below was changing in ways that threatened to shatter it. Everest had ceased to be a sacred peak, a goddess mother, and had become a commodity, a thing to be conquered and discarded. The trails, once quiet paths for pilgrims and hardy mountaineers, filled with crowds. The silence was the first casualty. It was replaced by the constant, irritating chop of helicopter blades ferrying tourists to base camp. The mindless chatter of people who saw a backdrop for a photo, not a home. They brought their noise, their music blasting from tiny speakers, and their trash, which they left scattered like profane confetti on the sacred snow. The mountain was groaning under the weight of this disrespect, and I felt the walls of my secret world begin to tremble, the pressure from the outside growing with every season. One afternoon, the inevitable happened. I was returning from the ice cave, my heart light after finding my offering had been taken, when I heard it. Loud, foolish laughter, echoing up from the valley below. I crept to the edge of a ridge and looked down. It was a group of 4 young trekkers, clad in bright, synthetic colors that looked alien against the earth tones of the rock. They had wandered far off the main trail, ignoring the markers, driven by that uniquely human blend of arrogance and curiosity. They were heading directly for the hidden valley, the one that led to his territory, to the waterfall, to the cave itself. My blood ran cold. The sounds of their joyful shouts were like hammers against the fragile peace I had worked for decades to maintain. They were walking blindly into a world that was not meant for them. My heart seized in my chest. I was too far away to call out to them without revealing my own strange presence in this untracked area. They were moving quickly, emboldened by their own ignorance. Every laughing shout that drifted up to me felt like a countdown to disaster. If they found the cave, if they saw him, everything would be over. The story would be a fire that I could not extinguish. It would bring reporters, scientists, and worse, it would bring hunters. The sanctity of my pact, the safety of my friend, it all rested on a knife's edge, threatened by nothing more than a group of careless tourists. A lifetime of secrecy was about to be undone by a single afternoon of stupidity. A wave of protective fury, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, rose in my throat. I had to stop them. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They would ask what I, Tenzin, the famous guide, was doing so far off the path in this desolate place. My presence would be as suspicious as anything else they might find. So I had to become a ghost, a myth to protect a reality. I quickly planned a route, my mind racing. The map of the terrain burned into my memory. I would circle around them, using the ridges and rockfalls for cover. A path that no tourist could ever follow. My old bones ached in protest, but adrenaline was a fire in my veins. I moved with a speed and silence I hadn't summoned in years, my feet finding purchase on the rock with an instinct born of a lifetime of survival. I was no longer a guide. I was a predator, stalking the careless animals that had blundered into my territory. After a frantic, lung-burning climb, I was ahead of them, hidden behind a large outcrop of rock that overlooked the narrow trail they had to take. I knelt in the snow, my breathing ragged, and pulled my ice axe from my belt. This tool, which had saved my life 100 times, which had freed him from the steel cable all those years ago, would now become a tool of deception. I leaned out and began to carve into a patch of smooth, wind-packed snow. I didn't carve the delicate tracks of a snow leopard. I carved a monstrosity. I used the adze to gouge out huge, deep prints, the pointed spike to etch long, vicious claw marks into the snow. I made them oversized, menacing, the tracks of a beast from a nightmare, something no one could mistake for a known animal. The tracks alone might not be enough. Fear needs a voice. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I saw their bright jackets appear around the bend. I watched as the lead trekker stopped, pointing at the tracks. Their laughter died instantly, replaced by hushed, nervous whispers. They gathered around the prince, their faces a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. This was my moment. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with the cold, thin air. I thought of the cry of pain I had heard in the blizzard, the low calls of guidance, and I reached for something deeper, something primal. I let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that started deep in my chest and scraped its way out of my throat. I pitched it low, letting the curved rock wall I was hidden behind act as a natural amplifier, sending the sound echoing down the narrow valley. The effect was immediate and absolute. It was more than I could have hoped for. One of them, a woman, let out a piercing scream. It wasn't a show. It was pure, unadulterated terror. The sound of my growl was still echoing off the rocks when they turned and fled. They didn't just walk away. They ran, scrambling over each other, slipping on the icy path. One of them dropped his pack, but didn't even slow down to retrieve it. Their panicked shouts faded as they disappeared back the way they came. Their brief adventure turned into a horror story they would tell for the rest of their lives. A grim, cold satisfaction settled over me, but it was quickly followed by a new and heavy dread. To protect him, I had to become the monster of their legends. I had to create a lie. The immediate danger was over, but I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I had traded a small problem for a much larger one. They would not stay silent. A story like this, the impossible tracks, the terrifying growl heard in the high, empty places, was too good not to tell. It would spread through the lodges in Namche Bazaar, whispered from trekker to trekker, eventually reaching the ears of journalists or thrill seekers. I had saved the secret today, but I had put a large, red circle on the map for anyone who was looking for a mystery. The price for my deception was a new and permanent layer of paranoia. I was no longer just guarding a creature, I was now guarding a lie that pointed directly, like a compass needle, toward the very place I needed to keep hidden from the world. Slowly, I made my way down to the trail and, with my worn boot, I smoothed over the monstrous tracks until they were gone, erasing my own fabrication. The silence that returned to the valley felt different now, heavier. It was stained with my deception. I looked up toward the high ridges, wondering if he had watched the whole pathetic spectacle, if he understood that I had played the part of a monster to keep the real monsters, the curious, destructive world of men, away from his door. As I walked the long path home, the pack abandoned by the fleeing trekker a stark reminder of the incident. The old questions burned in my mind with a new and desperate heat. Why did they stay here? What kept them tethered to this one place, even as our world encroached on all sides? Why was the sound of a helicopter enough to make them vanish for days? I knew then that my quiet pact was over. Protecting him now would require more than offerings. It would require a war fought with whispers and lies. The winter my wife, Pema, passed away was the coldest of my life. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The monastery rites, the chanting of the monks, the smell of burning juniper. It all felt like a performance for someone else's grief. Mine was a silent, internal avalanche, a crushing weight that left no air to breathe. My life had been defined by two anchors, the mountain and her. And now one was gone. I would wake in the night to the sound of her absence, a silence more profound and terrifying than any I had known on the high peaks. My secret pact with the mountain felt hollow. What good were warnings of collapsing ice when I could not stop the simple, slow collapse of a human body? The mountain gives, and the mountain takes. For the first time, the words tasted like ash in my mouth. My protector, my silent partner, was powerless against this. The greatest danger to me was not on the slopes, but inside the four walls of my own empty home. I felt utterly and completely alone, a ghost in my own life. I could not bear the sympathetic glances of the villagers, the quiet pats on the shoulder. Their kindness was a cage. One morning, before the sun had even touched the highest peaks, I left. I did not go to the ice cave. The ritual felt meaningless. Instead, I began to climb, my old legs moving with a grim, familiar rhythm. I went to a high, weed-scoured ridge, a place Pema and I had shared a thermos of butter tea 50 years before, our feet dangling over a sea of clouds. It was our place, a small altar of memory in the vast cathedral of the Himalayas. I sat on the frozen rock where we had sat, the wind tearing at my face, a merciless, physical assault. I did not fight it. I let the tears come, and I let them freeze on my cheeks, my grief becoming one with the ice of the mountain. I was not a guide, not a legend, not a keeper of secrets. I was just a man, hollowed out by loss, returning to the scene of his greatest happiness to say a final, silent goodbye. I surrendered to the cold and the quiet, hoping it would scour me clean. Then, I felt it. It was not a sound, not a sight. It was a change in the pressure of the air. A sudden stillness in the constant wind, a feeling of being watched. My first thought was a snow leopard, and a part of me, a dark and tired part, welcomed the thought of a clean, swift end. I raised my head, my eyes blurry with frozen tears, and peered into the gray morning light. He was there, sitting about 20 yards away, on a lower outcrop of rock. He was not hiding, not observing from a distance. He was simply present. He was immense, the adult form of the small creature I had saved so long ago, his white fur a stark contrast to the dark rock he sat upon. He was not moving, just watching me with those dark, intelligent eyes. There was no menace, no curiosity, just a quiet, profound stillness. He was holding space, a silent vigil in the crushing emptiness. The mountain was no longer indifferent. It had sent its heart to sit with me. We sat there for what felt like an hour, two solitary figures locked in a shared silence on the roof of the world. The only sound was the low hum of the wind over the ridge. I did not move. He did not move. We were 2 points of stillness in a world of constant motion. Then, he raised his massive head to the sky and let out a single, low, guttural moan. It was not an animal sound. I have heard the cries of every creature on these slopes, from the terror of a goat taken by a leopard to the lonely call of a bar-headed goose. This was none of those. This sound was heavy. It was ancient. It was the sound of grief itself, a raw, shared sorrow, echoing in the thin, cold air. It wasn't a call to a mate or a territorial warning. It was a lament. In that single, impossible sound, I heard my own loss mirrored back at me. We both lost something up here. We both knew the permanence of absence. In that moment, he ceased to be a creature I protected. He became my last kin, the only other soul who understood the language of my sorrow. After that day, everything changed. The dynamic of our pact shifted from one of mutual benefit to one of profound trust. My trips to the cave were no longer just to leave offerings. I felt him drawing me further, inviting me deeper. It was no longer about markings in the snow or a bundle of herbs. He started to appear, a fleeting shape at the edge of my vision, leading me on. He would wait for me on a distant ridge, then disappear, only to reappear further up, beckoning me to follow into territories I had forbidden myself from entering. I broke the most important rule of our pact, the one I had made with myself. I followed him. The fear I should have felt was replaced by a deep, compelling need to understand. I had shared his grief. Now, he was inviting me to share his secret. He was finally going to answer the questions that had haunted me for decades. Why here? Why hide? What were they running from? The answers, I knew, would change not just my life, but my understanding of the world itself. He led me higher than I had been in years, past the waterfall, past the small cave, into a region of shattered ice and ancient glaciers that no human ever saw. The air grew thin, and my lungs burned, but I followed his distant form, a white ghost against the blue ice. He led me to a narrow fissure in the face of a massive glacier, an opening so well hidden it was invisible until you were directly upon it. He waited for me there, then gave a low rumble from his chest, and disappeared inside. I stood at the entrance, the air pouring out of it impossibly cold. This was the true boundary. To cross it was to leave my world entirely and step into his. My heart hammered against my ribs. But the memory of that shared moan of grief was a bond stronger than fear. I took a deep breath, ignited the small lamp on my head, and stepped into the darkness, into the heart of the mountain. I was walking into the source of the myth, into the very soul of the secret I had guarded my entire life. The fissure opened into a vast, breathtaking cavern, a cathedral carved from ancient, compressed ice. My small headlamp beam was swallowed by the immense space. The walls were not white, but a deep, translucent blue, glowing from within as if they held their own faint light. It was a place of profound, humming silence, a silence that felt older than mankind. It was a library of ice, and as I moved deeper, I saw that its walls were covered in markings, generations of them, scratched into the surface of the ice with a sharp tool, forming a sprawling, complex tapestry of images. These were not random scrawls. They were pictograms, a history recorded in ice. I walked along the wall, my gloved hand hovering over the carvings, my breath misting in the frigid air. The scale of it was overwhelming. This was not the lair of a beast. This was the chronicle of a people, a hidden civilization's last testament, a story waiting for a reader. The first wall I studied showed his people. I recognized their tall, powerful forms immediately. They were drawn with a surprising grace, depicted hunting strange, deer-like animals, gathering plants, and caring for their young in caves. I saw figures that were clearly female, nursing smaller versions of themselves. I saw them gathered in circles, their heads tilted back as if singing to the moon. They were not monsters. They were a tribe, a family, with a culture and a history etched into the frozen heart of their refuge. I felt a wave of awe and a profound sense of trespass. This was their sacred history, their family album, and I, an outsider, was defiling it with my presence. He was standing silently in the center of the cavern, watching me, giving me permission, allowing me to see the truth of who they were. He was showing me that my years of simple offerings had bought me more than survival. They had bought me the right to bear witness to their soul. But as I moved along the cavern wall, the images began to change. The tone shifted from peace to fear. A new figure appeared in the pictograms. Smaller, weaker stickmen. They were drawn crudely, without the grace of his own people, and in their hands, they held weapons. Spears, at first, and then stranger shapes, long sticks that spat fire and smoke. My stomach tightened. These stickmen were us, humans. The carvings showed conflict. His people were depicted retreating, hiding in caves, while the stickmen hunted them. There were images of his people falling, wounded. It was a story of a first contact that had immediately turned into a massacre. They were not hiding because they were shy. They were hiding because they had learned, the hard way, that our species was a thing to be feared. The myth of the terrifying Métis was a lie. We were the monsters in their story, not the other way around. Then he guided me with a low nudge of his head to another wall, a section that looked newer. The carvings sharper, and there, I saw it. The image that broke my understanding of the world. It was a drawing of a ship, but it was not a vessel of wood or metal that I could recognize. It was long and sleek, and it was depicted falling from the sky, trailing fire and smoke. Below it, the stickmen, humans, were pointing their weapons upward. He then showed me another carving, a more recent one. It showed his people huddled deep inside these ice caves while strange, bird-like machines with spinning wings, helicopters, flew high overhead. The truth landed on me with the force of an avalanche, stealing the air from my lungs. It was all there, a story told across millennia. They were not beasts. They were not from here. They were survivors of a crash, refugees from a war we started. They were hiding from us, the violent, primitive apes who had shot them out of the sky and had been hunting them ever since. My entire life, my entire worldview rearranged itself in that single, frozen moment. The pact, the warnings, the secrecy, it all made a new, terrible kind of sense. He was not a cryptid. He was the last descendant of a fallen star, the orphaned child of a forgotten catastrophe. My mission to protect him was no longer about preserving a mystery or honoring a mountain spirit. It was about sheltering a refugee. It was about atoning for a sin my species had committed long before I was born. I looked from the impossible drawing on the wall to his dark, patient eyes. I finally understood the depth of the sorrow in his cry on that ridge. He was grieving more than just a single loss. He was the vessel for the grief of his entire people. He was the last one to remember why they had to hide. My name is Tenzin, and I was the only human who knew that the monster on the mountain was, in fact, the victim. What I have just shared with you is the heart of this story. It is the reason I did what I did. If you believe this truth needs to be heard, that his story matters, please show your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who will listen with an open heart. Stay until the end, because the hunt I told you about is about to begin. The Geological Survey team arrived last spring, their clean, white Land Rovers, a jarring sight against the prayer flags of my village. They said they were from the Nepali government, here to map tectonic shifts after the last big earthquake. It was a lie, and every elder in the village felt it. Their equipment was too advanced, too military grade. Their camp was too organized, run with a chilling efficiency that had nothing to do with science. Their leader was a man named Sharma, a cold, sharp-eyed officer who was clearly not a geologist. He moved with a predator's quiet purpose, and his eyes scanned the high peaks, not with a scientist's wonder, but with a hunter's ambition. He smiled, but his smile never reached his eyes. They set up their base, a scar of canvas and humming generators on the edge of our sacred valley, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they were not here for the rocks. They were here for the secret the rocks were hiding, the secret I had spent my life protecting. The hunt had begun. At first, their approach was soft, methodical. They set up in the village square, offering sweets to the children and asking the elders about local legends. They called it cultural documentation. It was interrogation, wrapped in a thin blanket of respect. They asked about the Métis, the wild man of the snows. They listened patiently to the old stories, nodding and taking notes on their digital tablets. Then they came to me, the great Tenzin, the man who knew the mountain better than his own hands. Sharma sat with me for hours, drinking my tea, praising my legacy. He asked about anomalies, strange tracks, areas to avoid, all under the guise of ensuring his team's safety. I gave him the stories he wanted to hear, the ones we tell the tourists. I spoke of snow leopards and bears and the tricks the wind plays on your mind at high altitude. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of myth around the truth. But I could feel his disbelief, a cold, smooth pressure behind his polite questions. He was not a man who believed in myths. A week after their arrival, the sound started. A low, persistent buzzing, like a swarm of metallic insects, drones. They launched them at dawn, small, gray machines that crisscrossed the high valleys, their cameras seeing everything. They violated the silence, the sacred emptiness of the high places. My world, once defined by the wind and the ice, was now overlaid with a grid of surveillance. I saw the effect on him immediately. My friend, the guardian of the peaks, vanished. There were no more distant sightings, no more tracks. The valley fell into a deep and fearful stillness. I knew he was still there, huddled deep in the ice caves, motionless, waiting for the mechanical eyes to pass. This was the fear I had seen in the ancient carvings, the terror of the flying machines. He had been taught for generations to hide from this exact threat. The drones were not just a nuisance, they were a ghost from his past, a historical terror made real, and they were methodically erasing the map of his world. My ritual, once a quiet act of faith, became a mission of espionage. Every trip to the ice cave was a gamble. I could only go at night, during the worst weather, when I knew the drones would be grounded. I would move through blizzards, a ghost in my own right, my bag of Sherpa feeling like a bomb I was trying to plant. The joy of the offering was gone, replaced by a cold, stomach-churning dread. Was one of their sensors tracking my heat signature? Was a soldier with night vision goggles watching me from a hidden ridge? The pact was now a liability, a trail of breadcrumbs leading them directly to him. The language of signs fell silent. I could not risk leaving the cave if a feather was at the entrance, and he could not risk leaving warnings for me in the snow. Our communication was severed by their constant, buzzing vigilance. We were both prisoners in the valley, isolated by the web of technology they had cast over the mountain. Our long relationship now a source of mutual danger. Sherpa began to single me out. The polite group meetings were replaced by private visits to my cabin. He would unroll his digital maps on my small wooden table, the cold blue light of the screen, an alien presence in my home. He stopped asking about legends. His questions became pointed, technical. "Tenzin," he'd say, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "Our instruments are picking up strange energy signatures from this valley, a low-frequency resonance that is not geological. You have climbed every inch of this mountain. You must have seen something." He was using my own reputation as a weapon against me, framing my silence as an impossible ignorance. He traced a line on the map with his finger, a line that ended chillingly close to the hidden waterfall. He was no longer fishing, he was aiming. The pressure was immense. He was a man accustomed to getting answers, and I was an old man running out of lies. My silence was becoming more suspicious than any confession. The paranoia became a constant sickness in my stomach. I began to see watchers everywhere. A shepherd on a distant ridge, a tourist with a long lens camera. Were they his people? I started waking at night, listening not for the wind, but for the crunch of boots on snow outside my cabin. The constant, low hum of their camp's generator, a sound that carried for miles in the thin air, was a permanent reminder that they were there, working, analyzing, getting closer. The net was closing, not with force, but with the patient, relentless efficiency of a glacier. I felt my lies wearing thin, like an old rope frayed by use. I had lived my life by a code of honesty and trust, the currency of a good guide. Now, I was a liar to my own people, a conspirator hiding a truth that felt bigger and more dangerous every single day. I was trapped between my loyalty to a man from my village and my sacred vow to a being from another world. The weight of the choice was crushing me. The near miss came on a clear, cold afternoon. Sherpa arrived at my cabin unannounced, 2 armed soldiers standing guard outside my door. He was not smiling. He held a tablet, and on its screen was a 3D rendering of the terrain. "Our ground-penetrating radar shows a significant cavity here," he said, his finger tapping a spot on the map that made my blood run cold. It was the exact location of the Great Cavern. It shows an entrance behind a waterfall, and the interior dimensions are unnatural, not a typical glacial formation. He looked up from the screen, his eyes locking onto mine. "You've been up there, haven't you, Tenzin? Your people say you know places on this mountain no one else has ever seen." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was a direct accusation. The truth was on the tip of my tongue, a hot coal I desperately wanted to spit out. I swallowed it down, the taste of ash and deceit filling my mouth. I forced a laugh, a hollow, reedy sound. "A cave. Commander, the ice is full of caves. They form and collapse every season. It is nothing, just the mountain breathing." The lie hung in the air between us, thin and transparent. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. But without my confirmation, he still had to proceed with caution. It was a small victory, but it came at a terrible price. I had looked that man in the eye and actively obstructed his mission, a mission sanctioned by my own government. I had used my legacy, my reputation for wisdom, as a tool for deceit. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the darkness, the weight of that lie a physical presence in the room. I thought of the creature I had sworn to protect, and the men I was now sworn against. The secret was no longer a quiet bond I shared with him. It had become a corrosive thing, a poison that was isolating me from my own world. The choice to protect him had cost me tourists and my reputation in the past, but now it was costing me a piece of my own soul. I was becoming the ghost I pretended to be, haunted by the consequences of a promise made in a snowstorm half a lifetime ago. My deception only made Sharma more determined. During his next visit, he dropped the last of his pretense. He spoke of national security, of artifacts that did not belong on this earth. He mentioned scrambled intelligence reports from the Cold War era, American and Soviet satellites that had tracked a falling object over the Himalayas, an object that went dark somewhere in this exact sector. "We are not hunting a monster, Tenzin," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We are looking for technology, something that fell here a long time ago, something that could change the balance of power in the world." In that moment, I saw them for what they truly were. They were not protectors or scientists. They were scavengers, no different from the careless climbers who left their rusted cables and trash on the ice. They wanted to break open this sacred place and loot it for weapons, for power. The terrible irony was that the creature I was protecting was not the prize. He was merely the inconvenient guard standing in their way. That night, as the wind howled outside my window, I saw a flicker of movement near the woodpile. I grabbed my headlamp, my heart seizing, and shone the beam onto the old stones. It was a new carving, freshly scratched into the rock. It was not one of the familiar signs. It was a crude but unmistakable pictogram of one of their drones. A jagged line struck violently through its center, a symbol of their danger, but it was the image beside it that stopped my breath. It was a small, simple stickman carrying a pack, and it was running, its legs bent in a clear depiction of flight, away from the mountain. It was a drawing of me. He wasn't asking for my help. He wasn't warning me about an avalanche or a coming storm. He was telling me to run, to save myself. In his world, the greatest act of love was to warn your kin to flee from the hunters. The final, terrible choice was now clear. He was willing to be found, to be captured or killed, if it meant that I, his only friend, would be safe. The mountain was about to take everything. Last night, they cornered me. They did not knock. The door to my cabin simply opened, and Commander Sharma stood there, flanked by 2 soldiers, their dark uniforms sucking the warmth from my small room. He held a tablet, its cold light illuminating his face, erasing any trace of the polite man he had pretended to be. On the screen was a thermal image, a bright, man-shaped heat signature moving in the rocks just above my cabin. It was him. "What is this, Tenzin?" Sharma asked, his voice flat, devoid of respect. The time for lies and legends was over. They had a picture of my ghost. I looked at the glowing shape on the screen, the shape of my friend. Reduced to a target on a map, I knew then that they would move in at dawn, with or without my help. My heart, a tired old drum, beat a slow, final rhythm. The choice he had given me, to run, was no longer an option. You cannot outrun a debt. You can only choose how you will pay it. I made one last climb, my old bones screaming in protest with every step on the frozen ground. I did not take the path to the offering cave. I took the high, forbidden trail, the one he had shown me. The air was still and painfully cold, and the mountain was utterly silent, as if holding its breath. He was waiting for me at the entrance to the great ice cavern, agitated, pacing back and forth. He did not need me to explain the new, sharp scent of danger in the air. He had felt the net closing, just as I had. When he saw me, he stopped and made a low, urgent sound. He pulled me inside, his massive hand surprisingly gentle on my arm, leading me not to the wall of his people's history, but directly to the oldest carving of all, the drawing of the ship falling from the sky in flames. He touched it once with a long, careful finger. Then he touched his own chest. Ship. Me. The message was as clear as a prayer bell in the morning air. He then began to dig, not with any tool, but with his own powerful hands, tearing at the ancient, compressed ice at the base of the wall. The sound was brutal. The scrape and crunch of his claws against the frozen history of his people, an act of sheer desperation. Ice flew, and he worked with a frantic energy that terrified me. He was unearthing something he had kept buried for generations, a secret far deeper than the cave itself. After a moment, his digging stopped. He reached deep into the hole he had made and pulled out an object. It was a piece of metal, twisted and scorched black, about the size of my forearm. It was not from any plane I had ever seen. It felt strangely light in his hand, and it hummed with a faint, almost undetectable vibration, a low thrum of energy that I could feel in my teeth. This was not a piece of a machine. It was the heart of one. The payoff, the terrible and beautiful truth, landed on me with the force of an avalanche. They are not from this world. It wasn't a theory. It wasn't a legend. It was a physical fact, humming in the frigid air between us. They are not monsters or spirits. They are refugees, the last descendants of a crew that crashed here, and they have been hiding from us, the violent, primitive apes who shot them out of the sky, for generations. This mountain is not their home. It is their final, desperate hiding place. Just as this realization settled into my soul, I heard it. The crisp, unmistakable crunch of military boots on snow, coming up the path. They had followed me. Sharma's men were here. The Guardian let out a low growl of fear and fury, and retreated into the deepest shadows of the cavern, the metal artifact left on the icy floor between us. I stood in the entrance, a frail old man silhouetted against the glowing blue ice, a bridge between two worlds about to collide. The hunt was over. Sharma appeared at the cave mouth, his pistol drawn. His eyes went from me to the artifact on the ground, and a look of triumphant, greedy understanding spread across his face. So, the stories were true after all, he breathed, the words turning to vapor in the cold. That is not from here, is it, Tenzin? That is the proof. That is what we came for. He took a step forward. Give it to me. It is a matter of national security. My mind raced. I could give it to him. I could save myself. I would be a hero, the man who delivered the greatest discovery in human history. They would leave, and my friend would be safe, for a time. But I knew what men like Sharma did with technology they didn't understand. They weaponize it. They would tear this mountain apart looking for more, and they would never stop hunting his people, turning their tragedy into our new arms race. To give him that artifact was to give him a key, a weapon, and a map. I bent down and picked up the strange metal. It was warm to the touch, despite the freezing air, and the humming vibrated up my arm, a silent plea. I looked at Sharma, at the cold ambition in his eyes, and then I looked back into the darkness of the cave, where a life of trust and shared silence was hiding. The mountain gives, and the mountain takes, and sometimes it asks you to give everything back. I saw the 50 years of our pact flash before my eyes, the black stone, the herbs, the blue poppy, the shared grief on the ridge. It was a debt of honor that I could not, would not, betray. In one final act of defiance, my old muscles screaming with the effort, I drew my arm back and hurled the artifact, not at Sharma, but sideways, into the gaping darkness of a bottomless crevasse that flanked the cave entrance. It vanished without a sound, the faint hum swallowed by the eternal silence of the ice. It was gone forever. A look of pure fury twisted Sharma's face. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of my jacket. "What have you done, you old fool?" he screamed, his face inches from mine. I did not flinch. I let my body go limp, my face slacken into a mask of weary confusion. "It was just a bear," I said, my voice hollow, the lie tasting like dust in my mouth. "A big one. I chased it up here. I am an old man, Commander. The shadows, they play tricks on me. There was nothing here, just a bear." I had made my choice. I would not be the hero who revealed them to the world. I would be the senile old guide who lost his mind on the mountain, the fool who led the army on a wild goose chase. I would erase my own legacy, burn my own legend to the ground, to buy him the one thing my world could never offer him, the peace of being forgotten. His secret was safe, buried under the wreckage of my name. They searched for hours, their powerful lights cutting into the ancient darkness of the cavern. But they found nothing. The walls were just ice, the floor was just rock. Without the artifact, without proof, their multi-million-dollar mission was a failure. Sharma gave me one last look of utter contempt before he and his men retreated down the mountain. "You wasted our time, old man," was all he said. As they left, and silence began to reclaim the valley, my eye caught a glint of color in the ice near the cave entrance, frozen into the glacier wall. It was a tattered piece of a bright red jacket. My breath caught in my throat. It was from the arrogant climber, the one who went missing all those years ago, on the day my pact began. And in that moment, the final piece of the story clicked into place. The Guardian hadn't been trapped by a random piece of junk. He had been trying to warn the foolish climber away from this unstable ridge, and in the ensuing rockfall, the man fell, and the Guardian was ensnared. My very first act of saving him was simply repaying a debt I didn't even know he had incurred on behalf of another careless human. He was never the monster. He was always the protector. The pact is broken now. He knows it, and I know it. They cannot stay here. My presence, my scent, my path to the cave. It has become a map that will lead others back. He and what's left of his kin must retreat higher, deeper, into the last untouched places where no man can ever follow. The silence that has returned is different. It is no longer watchful. It is empty. I am left with only the wind and the weight of a secret as vast and as cold as the mountain itself. I traded my name for his life. I became a fool in the eyes of my world to remain a friend in his. And I would do it again. The greatest truths I've learned are not the ones you can prove to others. They are the ones you are willing to sacrifice everything to protect. The silence is the real treasure. It is the only thing we have left to offer them. My name is Tenzin, and this is my confession. I am an old man, and I do not have much time left. But the truth of the mountain needed a voice, and I am the last one who can give it. I don't know if you believe me. It doesn't matter. The story is told. The debt is paid. What you do with it is up to you. Thank you for listening to my truth until the very end. Your time, your attention, it is the most valuable thing you can give. If this story meant something to you, please let it be known. Like this video, subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can find a voice, and share it with someone you trust. On your screen now, you will see a recommendation for another story. Perhaps it is another confession from another person in another corner of the world who also carries a secret they can no longer keep. Listen to it. We all have a mountain. We all have a choice.